The great thing about birds is it's an easy and accessible way into the environment. All you have to do is look out your window, and that can be the first spark.
That's Leslie T. Sharpe, and in our last episode, we heard her narration of the Bluebird Chronicles, a Catskills romance. This week, we sat down with Leslie to talk about bluebirds, butterflies, moths, and a host of other Catskills critters, and some simple steps for protecting this special place we call the Catskills. This is the fourth time we've heard from Leslie T. Sharpe, the third episode that covers bluebirds, and the 13th that touches on climate change. How do I know this? Catscast.com has a new search feature across all 63 episodes and counting, so you can find all the topics that interest you. Check it out at catscast.com. And now, our interview with Leslie T. Sharpe. All right, Leslie Sharpe, we collaborated in early 2020 at the very beginning of the pandemic on an audiobook edition of your book, The Quarry Fox and Other Critters of the Wild Catskills. And with our recording of the Bluebird Chronicles, I feel like we've really bookended the pandemic, or at least I hope we have. Hope we're at the end of this thing.
Please, let's hope we have, yes.
So what have you been up to for the past 2 years?
Well, I've been up here in the Catskills, and really what I've been doing is a lot of nature observation and thinking about, hopefully, a new project. The Quarry Fox, to me, there are things that I would like to continue on from that book. There are issues that really came out of that I barely touched on that I want to develop, and a lot of those have to do with the sustainability of species here, what we can do to help, especially in the light of things like climate change. This piece, the Bluebird Chronicles, is a great example of how people actually have intervened to help a critter survive. And there are other such examples of this that I want to talk about. And the overriding issues, of course, have to be governmental, but there are many things with individual species that we can do. The single biggest issue that I touched on even in this has to do with invasive species. And the biggest problem now is the hemlock woolly adelgid and what it's doing to the hemlocks. And how do we respond to it? There's two schools. Should we let them die and let another species come in? Or should we do as what we're trying to do with Catskill Center? Do we get involved with the use of biologics like silverflies, like certain beetles? So these are some of the things that I've been interested in and I've been thinking about when I haven't been in a coma because of the pandemic. I think the terrible thing about the pandemic was that it made us all feel like bears. We all kind of withdrew a little bit. But when Appalachia Journal, it's out of the Appalachian Mountain Club, it's the oldest journal of mountaineering and ecology and conservation in this country, the wonderful editor, Christine Woodside, got in touch with me. She wanted to do an issue that would have some articles, and there are several articles by great Catskill writers, and I'm honored to be part of this, that would look at climate change. And so I touched on that with the bluebirds and how our springs have affected it. And in asking me to do that, it sort of snapped me out of my malaise. Thank you, Chris. And it made me think this could be a seed chapter for a new book, but also to really start thinking even more about climate change, how I have lived on that mountain for 20 years and I've seen so many changes, and what we can do as individuals as well as what needs to be done on a governmental scale. Because, if individuals band together and do stuff, then that ultimately pushes governments to act too. So it's not just in the immediacy you can help a species, whether it's with a bluebird box or planting native milkweeds for monarch butterflies, but how can we also, in the growing awareness of these issues, banding together and then pushing government. And we have seen Catskillers especially are very good at pushing government to do the right thing. So it's really been a fallow period where I'm coming out of it now.
Where's your place up here?
It's in Western Catskills. It's outside of the village of Walton. It's very rural, very ag industrial. We're in that part of Delaware County. where the number one industry is still dairy and cattle farming, and it's in the watershed, so there's a lot of preserved land, and it's still very wild. My dear friend Nina Schengold, who you know, who did her own wonderful book, Reservoir Year, whenever she comes west, she says, I'm just amazed at how much more wild it is here, and that's just because it's less developed, and it's very, very rural. I'm between the two of the great reservoirs, Cannonsville and Papacton.
In the Quarry Fox, you dedicated quite a few pages to the subject of bluebirds, and in fact, your author photo shows you cleaning out a bluebird box.
Yes.
Of all of the Catskill critters that you enjoy watching and writing about, what's so special about bluebirds?
I think the thing about you've asked such an interesting question, because one of the things, if I do a book, I will expand this essay a bit, and I will talk about what is so special about bluebirds, because what is so special about a species that it motivates people to save that species? That's really what interests me. And I want to explore that in a new book. And what is that alchemy that we can tap into to save more species? It's very interesting. I think in the case of the bluebird, I was thinking about it this morning. Well, they're beautiful, but why are they beautiful? It's about color. There are very few birds with that much blue in them, at least in North America. You know, we have the bluebird, we have the indigo bunting. You can put the blue jay into that. You can put the blue grosbeak into that. There are a lot of birds that have blue in them. Beauty is what attracts people to certain critters. Certainly with the monarch butterfly, you can say that. But another thing also is the story that they have, and the bluebird's story. They're so connected through our mythology to spring. And as this one friend of mine said, without the bluebird, there would be no spring. They really are something that people have projected onto them, the end of winter. And if you have the end of winter, you have the end, to a degree, of death. The return of the bluebird is the whole idea of rebirth. That's another thing that they have going for them. And they have the advantage, and hummingbirds have this advantage, that if you put up some bluebird boxes, they'll come and you can observe them. It's the beauty, it's, their story, and it's the observation, that the ability to be near them. Hummingbirds, interestingly, that frail little guy, he hardly weighs a penny. Hummingbird numbers are actually increasing, which is really rather shocking considering their story and their migrations. Hundreds of miles, twice a year to and from Central America and Mexico to come up to our part of the world. But people are so attracted to them because of their glittering iridescence. The fact that they come in the spring, they come at the same day. If you put out, sugar water feeders, which of course I do, they always arrive on May 9th in that week. And they'll come and they'll look at you like, where is my feeder? And of course, what's going on now with these weird springs, they're insectivores and they're nectivores. If they don't have flowers, if they don't have insects, they can be in big trouble. So people have diligently, done the sugar water deal. And it's fascinating that their numbers, they're not in danger. They're not threatened. You would think they'd be in big trouble. But their numbers are actually increasing. And again, what really interests me is what is it about some of these creatures that people really reach out to help? Whereas a creature like cave bats, the little brown, 80-90% of their numbers have been lost because of white nose syndrome. Most people don't even know that. And I don't want to say what species is more useful to people, because that's another reason that people value creatures. What do they do for us as humans, for right or wrong? Bats eat 600 to 800 mosquitoes in an hour, and they are incredibly important for agriculture to save the use of pesticides. And yet people don't even know about white nose syndrome and how it's decimating these cave bat populations. And the story behind that is also linked to climate change to a degree. These things are so interesting to me. And so I think one of the things that I'm going to write about is the bias of beauty. And what really is that? And it really goes to something very basic, because it's really about what attracts us. I would love to figure out how we can sort of find what makes us save certain creatures. People can really make a difference. My idol, Jane Goodall, always says that the key to it all is hope, and to realize that you're not alone and that everybody working together can make a difference. And that's something, I think, that cannot be overstated.
Now, that said, animals that we gravitate toward and those that we don't, I was most surprised in your essay, it seems other people were too, about your response to the red-tailed hawk, an animal that you look up to and named that portion of your property after. But right. You were so focused single-sidedly, I guess, on saving these bluebirds that it drove you to bring your pellet gun down to where the hawks were roosting.
I don't think I could have ever shot those.
But you brought it with you, so that tells us something.
Oh, I sure did. I had it out on the deck, and I knew the crows would tell me, and the crows, my vigilantes, told me they were there. But it's an interesting tension. It's the idea of being the naturalist, the cool observer, which, of course, I break that rule all the time. I can't live so closely to these creatures and get to know them and not care about them. And what was interesting was how enraged I was that poor Papa had disappeared. Now, I don't have proof that the red tail took him, but I assume this actually is not the first time. You'll often lose one or the other. And that's another thing about the color blue, it makes them marks. It's easy to grab them. They're not like other birds. So I actually had another story, which I didn't even put in, about another Papa that was lost. And it was hilarious. Well, it wasn't hilarious. Losing Papa, I was devastated. And Mama had this box, and it was in the spring. And this other male bluebird showed up. Now, John Burroughs, God bless him, always liked to say, I shot the father during nesting season, but another male would come and take over. And I was like, what are you doing? But another male did come, but the male didn't come to take over for Papa. The male came to try to convince Mama to ditch the kids and start something new with him. And he was just constantly bedeviling her as she was trying to raise these. And it was really rather comical. Now, she managed to raise them, and she probably went off with him. But he was a pain in the neck. He drove the tree swallows away, set up the new thing, and kept on flying in and out and saying, no, leave, come. It was an interesting thing because it's all about his genetic imperative. But I thought it was interesting in reading Burroughs that Burroughs was saying another male would come in and assume no, they don't. The male just is like, would you, get rid of them. We'll have a new family. Who cares? It's all about his genetic imperative,
Now, you say the bluebird is a sign of spring, but here in this part of Ulster County, I feel like the robin is the sign of spring because I've never seen bluebirds here.
Well, this is not the topography for bluebirds. I mean, bluebirds for instance, where I am, I have a lower meadow, I have an upper meadow, and then there's mown grass. They need open space. They need meadows because that will attract insects. They like to sit up high and they like to look at critters on the, grass. So I have a perfect bluebird habitat. Robins are interesting because they're called faculative migrants. They migrate along the 37-degree isotherm, which means theoretically that's the temperature at 37 degrees that worms start to rise, and that they need that for their young. But if it gets too cold, robins just turn around and go south and come back later. A lot of birds can't do that, like the bluebirds can't really do that. Robins are like, okay. But yes, I think traditionally, the robin, that hardy thrush that related to the bluebird, that guy, will come first, although it's really the red-winged blackbird. Someone told me they had one over the winter. And I had a house wren recently. Originally the cardinal was not a northern bird. It was a southern bird. It's climate change, but especially people with backyard feeders, that the cardinal has now become the bird of holiday greeting cards in the snow.
Yeah. Well, it's a striking red against the white snow thing, too.
But we didn't used to have them. This is quite a few years, 30 to 50 years, that started to change. And because of climate change, we're having other things like that. Theoretically, the bald eagles will migrate when the rivers overfreeze, and they haven't been migrating. And a lot of bald eagles around. So as long as that water remains open, they will stay. But yes, you don't have bluebird habitat here.
I have bluebird boxes, but they're inhabited by swallows, which are just as exciting. For me
I
to
love
watch.
tree swallows. Yeah. Beautiful. Oh, when they arrive, it's like the whole mountain comes alive with their flight and their swooping and they're diving and they're iridescent and they're wonderful birds.
And at least here in the Catskills where there is habitat, I'm guessing that building houses and providing food is more probably for us than for the birds. We get to see them close to our homes. And
well, certainly for the bluebirds, they need those houses. The single most important element for birds in nature are dead trees. People take them down. I have lots of beautiful dead trees. First of all, they're beautiful. But secondly, think of all the birds. Woodpeckers and bluebirds. And then when you bring in invasives like starlings, the bluebirds still need their boxes and they're dependent on them. And also, as you pointed out, the same thing is true of the tree swallows. These birds are called cavity nesters, and they were largely driven out. Burroughs writes about setting up boxes for bluebirds, not to the specifications of our modern bluebird box. But think about it. It was before pesticides, and these are insectivores, these guys, and they were attracted by their lovely sweet song, their beauty, but also the fact that they're wonderful, ravenous insectivores.
And now on the property of the John Burroughs Woodchuck Lodge, there are, again, a whole bunch of bluebird boxes that are inhabited. Yeah.
And that's a very good habitat there because it's
big fields.
Big fields, exactly.
In a moment, part 2 of my interview with Leslie T. Sharpe, author of The Quarry Fox and Other Critters of the Wild Catskills, now an audiobook. Click the link in the show notes for more info. Catscast is sponsored by the Central Catskills Chamber of Commerce, providing services to businesses, community organizations, and local governments in the Central Catskills region. Follow the Central Catskills Chamber of Commerce on Facebook. You can sign up as a business member and subscribe to a weekly email of local events at centralcatskills.org. Catscast is also supported by the Mountain Eagle, covering Delaware, Greene, and Schoharie counties, including brands for local regions like the Windham Weekly, Schoharie News, and Catskills Chronicle. For more information, call 518-763-6854 or email mountaineaglenews@gmail.com. You have a long history with birds, including VP of the New York City Audubon Society. That's a big deal.
My biggest credit was when I was in second grade, I was president of Junior Audubon Society.
Wow.
That was the big thing. But it goes to show you, as a little girl, I fell in love with birds, and I was very fortunate because we went to the seashore, Stone Harbor, New Jersey, and I was like a little scientist at the seashore. But the thing about birds, especially for kids, it's a way into the natural world that's so easy. One of the things that happened during the pandemic for New Yorkers, first of all, it was quiet. People could actually hear birds in trees. It was like, oh my God, we have birds in New York. Well, anybody who knows anything about birding goes to Central Park, where I used to bird for years, and it's a green trap, and it's on the Eastern Flyway, and in the spring and fall migrations, the birds that my friends and bird photographer pals see there, it's more than I see. They see so many species. The boathouse in Central Park has a birding book, and at least something like nearly 300 species of birds have been recorded. People come from all over the world in those seasons to see that. But if kids get interested, the great thing about birds is it's an easy and accessible way into the environment. All you have to do is look out your window, and that can be the first spark. And that, for me, as a little girl, and then, of course, I grew up and did other things. And the reason I got involved with New York City Audubon in the early 90s was we had a devastating oil spill on the Kilvan Cull. And New York City Audubon Society sponsors a program. It's called Harbor Herons, and a lot of people don't know this. There are all these little protectorate islands. It's a huge nesting area for all kinds of shorebirds, and that was in the spring. It was right before nesting season, and I was so horrified. It was after what had happened in Alaska. And that's how I got involved with New York City Audubon. And then I got really involved and, was editor of the newsletter. And then I became vice president of the New York City Audubon Society, which is a really great chapter and extremely active and has really gone on to do terrific things. I'm really honored that I had that connection, and I'm connected to them. People just aren't aware of the fact that in the East River and the Hudson River, There are all these little weird, uninhabited, rocky outcroppings where all of these shorebirds come back and they nest.
So what advice do you have for Catskillians for taking care of our native wildlife here, whether that's birds or anything else?
Of course, if you have the habitat for it, bluebird boxes are such fun. And even if you don't get bluebirds, you'll get tree swallows. And if you don't get tree swallows, I had house wrens one year. You'll get them. And there are different kinds of nesting boxes. You can get them for black-capped chickadees. One of the great things to do is to put up a bat box, which I also have, and I haven't had bats in a while. The bats mama only has one puppy a year. They're mammals, whereas the bluebirds could come back pretty quickly. It's going to take a while to bring back our little cave bat populations, but you could certainly do these boxes. A really fun thing to do, and it's very simple, is looking at grass and how the idea of the lawn, which really came from sort of middle-class folks with their nice little gardens in England, aping the formal gardens of the upper class and these manicured lawns. And we know that that involves the use of pesticides, that involves the use of herbicides. People use herbicides, pesticides on their lawn, and the fireflies lay their eggs and they stay in the ground and the larvae will be killed. But there are simple other things in terms of what can you do to help these creatures. Many of us are fortunate to see Luna moths, which have very short lifespan. They last maybe a week, not even, 2 weeks. They come in June, let's say here. That's when I get mine. If you turn your lights off, outside lights, from the end of May into August, you will help populations of Luna moths. The Luna moths get very confused by lights because they fly by the moon. That's why they're called the Luna moth. And they have a romance with light, and they only live a week to 10 days, and they won't mate. They'll spend all of their time fluttering around lights. Turn off the lights for the Lunas, but also for our beloved fireflies. I mean, for me as a kid, did you love anything more than fireflies as a kid? One of the simple things that people can do is to sort of rethink the way lawns should look. It's sort of been a conspiracy, by certain interests, economic interests, to have the green. That green lawn is very often a desert. There's no insects. And we know there's something called, insect-mageddon. First of all, without the honeybee, we have no fruits and vegetables, so to speak. But beyond that, insects feed birds. That's a whole chain of being. If you just even take small things like there's a thing called no mow May. Don't mow in May because that will allow the wildflowers to come up. That dandelions that are so sort of maligned, that's the first wildflower often of spring. They are crucial to pollinators that are desperate for food. The dandelion is a wonderful resource for early bees. And then after that, every other week, and keep the grass high. Try to allow, because these things, whether it's dandelions, I understand they're weeds. Everybody wants to call them weeds. But clover, when did clover get demonized? Purple clover, white clover, these are essential foods for so many pollinators. And so even if you just take a portion of your lawn and say, okay, I'm going to mow this. No pesticides, no herbicides. I'm going to mow that I'll do mow May, I'll do every couple of weeks. But I'm going to take this corner and look to native species. Plant a corner and see the amount of butterflies and the amount of birds and the amount of life that it will attract, as opposed to the sort of storied, manicured, dead, closely cropped lawns. So there's a lot of individual things I think that people can do that could be fun. It's great for kids.
We covered a lot, Leslie. Is there anything that you wanted to add, particularly about this latest article?
I wanted to thank Appalachia Journal. This is their winter and spring 2022 issue. This one is called Cataclysms in the Catskills and Taconics, with Catskill Falls on the cover, and I was honored to be in it. And I want to thank them and tell people they're from the Appalachian Mountain Club. They can check them out, get a subscription. I'm doing a pitch because they are terrific. I'm very appreciative to my wonderful editor, Chris Woodside, for coming to me and for caring so much about the Catskills. And we have to remember we're all part of that same eroded plateau. Sometimes it seems overwhelming, but as Jane Goodall would say, the thing to do is remember that there are many other people out there who care as much as you do. And if we don't lose track of that, and we see ourselves as a mosaic of caring, and always realize that there's hope. And the bluebirds have been saved. You know, it's hard for people to imagine, but the wild turkeys almost went extinct at the turn of the 20th century. They were saved. Now we have so many, I can't walk out without stepping on turkey poop, and I'm always grateful. That's my last word. It's on turkey poop.
Great place to end it.
Yes,
Thank you so much, Leslie.
Oh, thank
nice
you,
to have you
Brett.
back
Thank
here.
you so much for having me. It's so great to work with you again. It's always a great deal of fun, and I always describe you to people as Brett of the Dreamboat voice.
I'll have to put that on my website.
Yes.
All right. This is Brett of the Dreamboat Voice. Thanks for that, Leslie. Reminding you to please check out our new website, catscast.com, with expanded coverage, links to our sponsors, and a search feature across all of our episodes. And please vote for us in this year's Chronogrammys, where we were nominated for Best Regional Podcast. There's a link in the show notes. We'll also post a link to Leslie's article, The Bluebird Chronicles, a Catskills romance, and a link to her book, The Quarry Fox and Other Critters of the Wild Catskills, now in audio format and available wherever you get your audiobooks. Catscast is a production of Silver Hollow Audio. I'm Brett Barry. Thanks for tuning in. Give us a rating so more people can find the podcast. Tell your friends about us. And we'll see you again in 2 weeks.